I've come to believe that probably the main reason that we as a community are unable to take any meaningful action on climate change, let alone comprehend the magnitude and the complexity of this problem that we all face, is probably like the main reason that nothing can really get done about it. Some stuff, but not enough. It's so overwhelming. How can you even thinking about doing something meaningful? But what if I told you that there's some very clever people all around the world who are figuring out ways to put meaningful, achievable change into the language and business plans that our brains, which are wired for short-term decision-making, can actually comprehend and go, whoa, that's a good idea. One of those people is Dan Adams. He's the co-founder of Amber Energy, which is a small independent Australian energy retailer that have a simple yet elegant business model which uses market pressure, which is a language that investment capital understands, to force the larger energy providers into shifting their generation from fossil fuels towards renewable energy and storage. Dan is my guest on the podcast this week. And if you've not thought about your energy bill as a way to engage in meaningful climate action every day, it's a conversation you might be interested in. So let me tell you about my guest today. Dan Adams is the co-founder of Amber Energy. They're an Australian independent energy retailer with the simple mission to get Australia to 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible. However, in the absence of meaningful government policy, and look, I have my theories as to why decades of consecutive governments of all shapes and sizes and flavours and sides of the aisle have done fuck all about something that is so obvious to even primary school children. We'll get into that later. Dan and his business partner, Chris Thompson, they pretty much decided that in the absence of policy, in order to try to help the big incumbent coal-burning power companies to shift towards renewable energy, those companies need to be spoken to in a language that they understand. Investment capital, which is, I guess, the money that is put into massive infrastructure projects and will hopefully give a return for 10, 20, 40 years, things like, super funds, managed funds, funds run by bank, private funds, big stuff like that. Places looking for a sturdy, long-term, predictable return over decades, hoping to put a couple of spare million in and get a couple of spare million out every year. That's not silly money. That's very smart money, and it's well-researched money, and weeks, if not months, goes into where to put that money and invest in the companies that are working that will provide that return over the decades, right? Essentially, it's lots of money looking to make lots more money, all right? And it's very smart money. And it likes to play it safe. So there's one thing that'll make that money vanish from an infrastructure project or a company. Those investors, the funds, will go quick sticks. If that company that they've invested in has a product that isn't selling very well, or a business model that is unsustainable or really inefficient with high production costs, okay? Those funds love to invest, though, in things that have low production costs, have a hot product that a lot of people are using and more people are using. And in fact, when like one fund gets in on this, the next fund across the street, they go, holy shit, we got to get in on that. And then they want to come in as well. And then someone else wants to come in as well, sending the stock price of that company up and therefore giving that company more capital to then do what they're doing even more. Because everybody wants to ride to the moon, on this rocket of investment gains, right? Simply put, a business with innovative products that are in demand and are cheap to produce, they're the things that investors look for. Now, those are startlingly clear signals that even the most climate-denying politician cannot ask an industry to ignore. They really fucking try. But our current Conservative government is so hardline on their belief that the market will decide that, look, they did not act when they were warned that Australia would need just squillions of rat tests come summertime, okay, last year. And instead of acting, they insisted that the private market would take care of it and the market demand would decide when these things would come into the country. Anyway, you and I both lived through summer. You and I both had a summer holiday or not. We all have a story to tell about what happened there. To say they dropped the ball is to, yeah, but this hard line, like, no, the market will decide. So what Dan and Chris from Amber are doing is simply giving customers access to real-time grid prices, okay? So when there's lots of renewables in the grid, their electricity prices are incredibly low. Now, I am a fan of electric mobility. I have an electric car, electric motorbike, electric bicycle, electric scooter. So we're talking a lot of kilowatt hours, right? Sometimes the prices on Amber are so low, they're like 7 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the lower ceiling of that. And we'll get towards why it never gets cheaper than 7 cents. But that's fucking crazy cheap. But what about when there's not a lot of renewables in the grid? Well, the prices get to a point which will not only make your eyes water, you'll probably want to kick over an election sign in someone's front yard when Dan talks about what happens to those energy retailers' bank accounts on those big, hot summer days on the East Coast. We're about to get an election called in Australia. However, every single day, you can choose to vote on progressive climate policy that will save your ass and mine and our kids and fucking maybe the economy. We get to vote on meaningful climate policy every day with our wallet. All right? How we shop, how we get from here to there, where you put your super, where you go on holiday, how you go on holiday, what you eat, and how you use your electricity and who you buy your electricity from. If we're going to live in a country where change only happens because of market pressure and not policy, then if you're anything like me, that's what we're going to have to do. That's what we're going to have to do so we can sleep at night and look our kids in the eye when they ask us, what did you do? You can find out more about Amber Electric at amber.com.au. And I hope you get the chance to think about your energy bill a little differently after this conversation with Dan Adams.
How you going?
Good, man.
That's good.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's a good setup you've got there. I've got my dinky headphones and you've got the full...
Well, look, one of us runs an energy company. The other one is trying to run a podcast company. So, you know, it must be so weird to be in those massive, massive companies that at the same time are charging like a fucking bullet train, yet because they cannot turn, they cannot pivot. So it must be wild to be in those companies and be smart enough to be hired by them, to see projections, to see 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50-year projections ahead of you and go, this is where we have to go. There's no way to make money and not go that way and yet balance what the incumbent leadership, shareholders, super funds, whatever, are expecting of you. I don't know how people get out of bed and go to work at a place like that. I certainly wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, it's a kind of classic incumbent's dilemma. Like I'm sure everybody there can see the writing on the wall. Everybody there can see the world is going to 100% renewables. The world is going to electric vehicles. This is the future, and that is the future. Both like the moral imperative that's the future, but also like economically, that's where all the opportunities are. But if all of your assets are tied up in the old world, it's just very hard to make that transition at the speed that we need to be making that transition. And you just have these sort of misaligned incentives to what is in your short-term interest is fundamentally not in your long-term interest or the interest of the world.
I love the way you think about things, Dad, and you know, I'm so grateful I could talk to you, but researching this conversation, I realized that I knew of your work well before Amber Electric, well before. I'd love to know, what were you doing right before you went, you know what? Make poverty history. That's a fucking great idea. I'm going to make this enormous festival. Let's go. Like, what was happening in your life right before that?
Well, I was very young. I was 19 when that concert happened. And there was a moment just before that was quite a confronting experience for me that was really transformed everything I've done in my life since then. So I just finished high school. I was fortunate enough to get to go surfing over in Samoa, which was an amazing trip. And while I was there, I cut myself on the coral reef. And I went and lay down in this little sort of farley that I was staying at. And 24 hours later, I was still lying there, shaking deliriously with sweat dripping down my face. And a guy who I'd been surfing with came and found me and realized how sick I was. They took me to the local hospital. The local hospital had 37 doctors, but 30 of them were on strike because of the conditions in the hospital. And I sat in this queue of 6 Samoans, just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And eventually a doctor came and took my temperature, and she said, your temperature, I think it was 40.1 degrees. And she said, I think you've got a golden staph blood infection. And without antibiotics, you're going to die. And we don't have any antibiotics on the island. And basically we can't help you. And it was for a young person who had grown up in Melbourne. I had a very privileged upbringing in Melbourne to be confronted with that reality of the inequality that exists in our world, that I could buy those drugs for $10 at the local chemist, and yet I was told I was going to die for want of drugs that we could get so easily. Fortunately, my family rallied around. I had travel insurance. They organised a plane to fly me off the island to a first world hospital. I spent 2 weeks on an antibiotic drip. I lost a lot of weight, but eventually I recovered. And I lay in that hospital bed thinking, why the hell do I have the right to drugs and to a plane to fly me off the island when the local people don't have the right to drugs that cost just a few dollars? And realising that I wouldn't be alive had I been a local Samoan was a really confronting experience for me. And so I lay in that hospital bed and I started, thinking about this inequality that exists in our world, trying to learn about it, trying to understand why does this still exist, realising that the world had, the financial resources to end this inequality. We just needed the collective will to make that happen. And I started learning about the Millennium Development Goals, the Make Poverty History campaign that had been running in Europe at the time. Bob Geldof had organised the Make Poverty History concert, or the Live 8 concerts in the UK in 2005. So this is January 2005. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do something like that in Australia? Run a concert in Australia, build awareness around this inequality that exists in our world, and encourage our government to play a more effective role in addressing inequality in our region. And so I thought, I probably shouldn't be alive. So if I have to work pretty hard for the next 12 months, that's no big deal. And so I came back and I had no experience in the music industry, literally no idea what I was doing. But just this idea that, and at that point, the idea was to have it at Federation Square, to have sort of one high profile band and send a message to our government. And I spent 6 months calling every band, every media partner, every sponsor I could think of in the country. Had a sort of team of volunteers from the Oak Tree Foundation, and we got absolutely nowhere. Everyone was sort of losing faith that this pipe dream could actually happen. And then we managed to get one big Australian band on board. It was Evermore at the time. And then suddenly this thing just started snowballing, and all these bands that I've been calling started calling me back saying, we hear this thing is happening. We want to be a part of it. I wasn't very cool, so I had to get my friends' advice about which bands to get on board. And then one day I was lying in bed at sort of 2 a.m, and I thought, if I could have any band in the world at this event, who would it be? And I decided it'd be Pearl Jam or U2. So I got up, found their management contact details online, called them up, sent them off an email. They said, righto, mate, send us a proposal. I thought nothing more of it. And then about a month before the concert, I got this call from Pearl Jam's manager, and she said, Bono and Eddie Vedder have been talking about your concert, and they'd love to come and perform. Have you still got a spot in the bill?
Oh, fuck. Hang on, let me just check. Oh, guys.
Yeah, and so
Wow.
it just took this thing to a whole new level. And so I was 19 at this point, suddenly trying to negotiate media rights with Channel 10 and Nova and the Herald Sun, and it was really quite an experience. And we ended up having 100,000 people apply for 15,000 tickets. We had to have an overflow site with another 10,000 people down at the Docklands, and had live sites around the country, broadcast nationally on TV and radio, and made the front page of the paper. And we had 50,000 young people sign up to be part of the campaign to end extreme poverty, and to ask our government to play a more effective role by increasing our aid budget. And Kevin Rudd was actually at the concert. And the next year, when he got into power, Kevin 07, pledged to increase our aid budget to 0.5% of gross national income, which represented a few $billion of additional funds for developing countries in our region, and cited the campaign as one of the reasons for that decision. Now, whether or not it was, I'll never know. But if we contributed even in a really small way, it was a pretty remarkable year.
So after the end of that concert, clearly you are like, this is more than healthcare. It's bigger than medicine. It's bigger than, like, inequality. Where are the root cause? I mean, we could talk about how the fossil fuel industry is essentially still colonial exploitation 400 years after we said that's not a good thing to do anymore. We're still fucking exploiting in a colonial way. It just looks like corporations doing it. It's colonialism. It just is. It's colonialism. It's white people extracting resources from poorer countries. It's what it is. When did you start to go, energy might have a play here, and energy independence and renewable energy and free access to energy as far as a way of economic development might be the connection? When did that happen for you?
Yeah, so I think I'd always been sort of passionate about climate and sustainability for a long time. I'm a surfer. I love the outdoors. I love mountains and nature, and I've always really appreciated that. Spent a lot of time sort of diving in the Great Barrier Reef, and so I was always concerned from that perspective. And then that experience in with the Make Progress History campaign really made me see the other side of this, the human side of climate change, and the inequality that already exists in our world, but that is going to be exacerbated dramatically by climate change. And it is the world's most vulnerable people that are living on less than $2 a day that are going to be most affected by the massive climate shocks that are going to happen. No matter how fast we decarbonise, some of this is already going to happen. And the injustice of that the people that have contributed most to this problem are the ones that are going to be affected least, and these people that have contributed the least are going to be, if you're living at the margins of survival and then all your crops fail because of a heat wave or because of a flood, the impact on them is huge. And so I just realised that we can't solve any of these important social issues unless we solve climate change. Like, we need a sustainable planet in order to have a prospering society and an equal society. Climate change will exacerbate international inequality between countries. It'll exacerbate inequality within a country. And it'll exacerbate hugely intergenerational inequality between generations. And so I think both from the sort of environmental perspective of, I love this beautiful planet that we live on, and then also from this human perspective of this inequality that exists already in our world, and that is going to be accelerated by this. It just made me really passionate and was like, this is what I want to spend my life solving. I was born at this sort of moment in time. Like, the next 10 years are going to be really critical for humanity in terms of if we can actually respond to climate change at the rate we need to. Like, the transition is happening, but will it happen fast enough? The next 10 years are going to determine that, and that is going to be probably one of humanity's greatest tests. And if we can do it, we've set up all future generations for a sustainable world. And I think humanity will learn a lot of lessons from the last 100 years. But if we fail, you basically can't come back from that. And so I just feel really fortunate to have been born at a time where I can contribute in some small way to addressing that problem. And I think, I feel really fortunate, but also excited by the opportunity, because I really believe that we can do this.
I'm so happy to hear your hope in your voice, because there was a time when I was without hope, and then I got really sick actually because of this kind of lack of hope. My brain decided that there was no one working hard on this stuff, which is not true, but I couldn't see that there were plenty of solutions in play, and people were working very, 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 very hard to try and make this happen. And some of that, looking for answers, I started looking into, what role access to energy had in building economies, the economy of the UK and the US and Australia, I guess, once coal showed up and once steam showed up, and that how very quickly quality of life improved once, access to energy that allowed ideas to then exacerbate at scale, to get bigger at scale, started happening. We'll talk about Samoa, because, we were talking about that. How can access to, free or near free renewable energy help a country like Samoa over the next 10, 20 years? I mean, as you said, Australia, we'll be fine. We'll figure it out. We may have to live on desalinated water and GM potatoes, but we'll be okay. But if you're in Samoa, or my wife's country of Fiji, and 3 times a year, 300-kilometre winds come by and fucking destroy everything, it's tough. So tell me about how renewable energy plays a role in those countries, prospering and hopefully thriving.
So I think we are very fortunate that renewables are now the cheapest form of power. In fact, I think that is in many ways just a lucky streak that this has happened right at the moment when we really needed it to happen. But most of those Pacific Island countries run their grids on imported diesel, which is very expensive. You're shipping it across the world. There's risks of oil spills bringing it into these beautiful Pacific reefs, and it's very expensive. It is unreliable, and it is contributing to climate change, which is going to cause those Pacific Islands to be inundated with seawater if we don't do something about it really quickly. And there is an alternative, which is solar plus batteries, is actually a cheaper solution for Pacific Island nations. I actually spent a little while working in Hawaii, setting up Hawaii's community solar program about 5 years ago, which was great fun. Nice to be able to go surfing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, because that's a really interesting case, in that Hawaii, I believe that all their energy is liquid fuel. Their power is all liquid fuel, and it's all imported. But it's still a first world country. That the cost of living in Hawaii is astronomical because of how isolated it is and how they've chosen to power themselves. So what did you learn from that experience?
So you're right. Hawaii's power comes from imported oil. It's called bunker oil. It's like the most polluting, cheapest dregs of the refining process. And it is incredibly expensive, which is why Hawaii is really a test case for the world. So when I was there in 2015, and renewables, particularly solar, was just taking off. Like, they have an incredible solar resource there. They have an incredible wind resource there. This is true in many of these Pacific countries and states. They will be one of the first places to run their entire grid on solar plus wind plus batteries. And it is a really exciting test case for the world to prove that can be done, to prove that you can manage supply and demand of intermittent renewables with the demand of 1.4 million people that live on Oahu. So there are, I think it is a really good example for the world of what's possible, and that the transition there is happening before anywhere else, because the economics made sense there before they made sense on the mainland US. And actually, I think the next, if you sort of think about where are the places that this makes sense, probably made sense first in small Pacific Islands and Hawaii. But probably the next place where it makes sense is in Australia. Because we have an incredible solar resource, we have an incredible wind resource, we have an incredible amount of space. There is probably no other country on Earth that is better positioned to take advantage of the renewable transition that's going to happen over the next, hopefully over the next 10 years than Australia. And it seems absolutely crazy to me that we're not jumping on that opportunity, because both from an environmental perspective, from a moral perspective, and from an economic perspective, it is an unbelievably big opportunity for us.
When you did the Make Poverty History event, and when Eddie Vedder and Bono go, yep, this is a good idea, you're playing to the stands. You're giving the fans what they want to see. You're giving Eddie Vedder and Bono an opportunity to go, yes, this aligns with how I already feel. You are playing to their existing morals. It is the morally right choice to feel, this is not good that these healthcare options are available to me, yet not these countries. How does it make you feel that we've had to wait for it to be the economically right choice before bigger players are starting to move, like the aforementioned Shell?
I think climate change is kind of a classic tragedy of the commons, that, every one of us, the way that humanity operates is that we are individually smart, but collectively stupid. Like, if you look at what we're doing to the world, like if you look from the outside, if you're outside, the human race, and you look at these smart humans that can make an iPhone, this incredible piece of technology, but are destroying the very planet that supports their way of life. That just makes no sense. And the reason that makes no sense is that if you look at it from the individual perspective, each of us get to drive our car, get to go for our overseas holidays, get to eat meat or whatever it is that we're doing that's contributing to this problem. But the whole world shares the cost of that. And so there's kind of two solutions to that. One solution is that we all try and cooperate. Like, you get 7 billion people to cooperate and say, I won't do this if you won't do that. Basically impossible. And then the other way is you actually just align the individual's interest with that social and environmental outcome. And then if you're going to align it, there's probably two ways to do that. One is government policy. So you just make the sustainable choice the cheapest choice. You subsidise the electric vehicles. You subsidise the technology that is required to get to net zero emissions. That's one option. The other option is you just let the economics do it. And fortunately, for some subset of the problem, a large subset of the problem, electricity and renewables, the economics are doing this for us now. Like, the economics are aligning the customer's interest with the environmental interest. Using renewable power is now the cheapest form of power. For what's left, where the sustainable option isn't the cheapest option, I think we do need government policy to align those interests, because just relying on sort of goodwill and altruism, I think won't get us there. Even though people are genuinely good, you've just got this sort of misalignment of incentives problem and this tragedy of the commons that is very hard to solve without policy or economics in your favour.
It is a tragedy. I've as I mentioned, I spent a fair bit of time in the Netherlands. I was there for, I guess, about a year and a half all up, on and off, for about 6 weeks at a time. I was studying over there and seeing, they've got skin in the game. They're, at the very least, I think they can handle a 2 metre sea level rise. Like, the whole country's below sea level. Like, you can't quite comprehend the daily, like, walking through Hammerstraat in Amsterdam, understanding that I am like 4 meters under the surface of the ocean. And it's been that way for 400 or 500 years or whenever they built it. You're like, fucking hell, these guys are they're incentivized to get some shit right. They have to, because their entire way of life will absolutely get destroyed. Well, one big storm and they're fucked. And, seeing, as I rode my bicycle around, seeing how many EV charge points would just be popping up over the year and a half that I was there, and understanding the incentives, the government incentives into electric vehicles and into, bicycles and transport infrastructure, and going, well, it's just actually, I get it. The threat is so real for them that they just go, oh, this is the right thing to do. We'll do it. Yeah, here in Australia, we're just so fucking lucky that we're not. We're, sure, half our country burned down 2 years ago, but it was last summer. It's been wet the last 2 summers. Fine, whatever. We're so divorced from what's actually going on. I really hope we don't get to the point where there's no bananas or lettuce on the shelves before people go, oh, that. But unfortunately, we kind of have to. I say it all the time. I hope we don't have to wait for the heart attack before we change our diet, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think humans really struggle with long-term, intangible, uncertain problems. Like we were evolved to, fight the lion that jumps out at us or fight the person that attacks us in that moment, that immediate threat. And these sorts of threats that are, 10, 20 years in the future, there's uncertain, complex science that are driving it. You don't know exactly, it's going to be bad, but you don't know exactly how bad. It's kind of hard to imagine a world with, 2 degrees or 3 degrees of warming. And I think we are just not well suited to solving those problems, which is why we need someone smart to look at the maths and the economics and go, okay, this is going to happen. And I think this is the policy that we need to put in place so that from every individual perspective, this becomes, there's a short-term incentive to do that, which is to buy an electric vehicle because it's cheaper than a petrol car, to use renewables because they're cheaper than coal, to buy green steel because there's been government support for green steel. Humans just will not solve this problem unless we set up the systems and structure incentives to make it happen.
You were a part of the very, very big battery or the very, very big Twitter bet between Cannon-Brookes and Musk, which I love that happened. What was that like? Were you at Tesla before the tweet happened? What was it like on the day the tweet happened? What happened next?
So there's actually 2 projects in South Australia. There was the Tesla Big Battery, which was the Mike Cannon-Brookes Elon tweet. And then there was a second project, which Elon announced shortly thereafter, which is as well as building this massive battery in South Australia, we're also going to build a massive battery distributed across thousands of homes in South Australia, control those all as one big power station and feed them into the grid. And so I was hired to develop that second project. So the distributed batteries across thousands of homes in SA. So I wasn't there exactly at the moment that those tweets were flying around, but I've heard some pretty good stories about it. It was a pretty wild few days there at Tesla. We were actually doing that on social housing in South Australia, so installing solar panels and batteries across thousands of social housing in SA, and then giving the residents of those homes cheaper electricity than they were currently buying. So they were getting a discount on their electricity bill, and their power was coming from solar panels on the roof and batteries in the garage. So it was pretty cool to see what was possible there. And I think they're the sort of models that we need to really get this to scale, so that we can take this to the mainstream, not just to the wealthy few who can afford it right now.
Part of the thing that you are doing at Amber, and we're definitely getting towards that because I really want to talk a lot about it, is the upward consumer pressure on industry. And when do you think, looking back at Australia's history of solar uptake, which is fucking significant when you look at around the world, when did you think that energy companies started to kind of go, oh, hang on a second here, this is our bottom line, people aren't buying as much as they used to? When did that start to happen in Australia?
It's been happening for quite a while. So I was at the Boston Consulting Group for a while, advising electricity retailers and networks back in sort of 2013. And back then I did a piece of work for one of the big players looking at the forecast uptake of solar and batteries. And on the one hand, they were sort of concerned about what it was going to do to their existing business, and it was going to cannibalize their existing business. And on the other hand, sort of thinking about, where's the economic opportunity in here for us? And I think it's similar to the conversation we're having about with Shell at the moment. Is it's just I won't mention names, but they own large coal and gas generators, and so it's just fundamentally not in their interest to do this. Like those assets have a long existing remaining life on them, and so as much as they know that this is right for the world, they know that there's economic opportunities there. They have this classic incumbents dilemma that it's just not in their incentive, in their interest to accelerate that uptake, and so they kind of dabble around the sides. But they're also, and even if they wanted to, I think they're just too big and too slow and too set in the ways they've always done things for very long periods of time. They just cannot transition. So I think people have seen the writing on the wall. Like the future that we're now building with Amber, I think that has been well known for 10 years that this was coming. But the big players didn't want to accelerate it, and the small players, didn't have the capital to make it happen. And we needed a little bit of technology innovation along the way too.
It is interesting how the confluence, like when I think about podcasting, for example, podcasts have been around since the iPod showed up, right, in 1999, 2002, I think I got my first iPod. But it wasn't mobile. There was no, I got, I think, 40 or 400 meg a month of data or something like that back then. Like, that's 3 podcasts and I'm out. I can't send emails, whatever, right? So you kind of had to wait for the handsets to accelerate to a point where they could handle processing, multitasking. That you had to wait for the mobile data caps to go through the roof, and headphone technology to explode, and then bang, podcasts. Suddenly everyone's, you have to wait for these things to all kind of happen at the same time. And similarly, Amber couldn't have existed without smartphones and smart meters. Yeah. And now here you are. When you think about what's been driving you and all the work you've been doing, how did that shape the business model that Amber is?
Yeah. So I've been passionate for a long time about how do we move the world to 100% renewable energy. And the challenge when I started working in this field, 10 years ago, it used to be that renewable energy was expensive. It's actually, renewables are now the cheapest form of power. That's no longer the problem. The problem now is that it's not always windy and it's not always sunny. So those cheap renewables aren't always available in the grid. And so one solution to that is large-scale batteries to charge up when there's excess wind and solar and then discharge when people need power. But that is quite an expensive solution. And there's a much cheaper option, which is just to help people use that cheaper renewable power when it's available in the grid. And then there is this really big opportunity to do that now with household batteries, electric vehicle chargers, and other smart devices entering the home that can be automated to automatically use that cheap renewables when they're generating. And the kicker is that because that renewable power is cheaper, that will both save people money and drive the renewable energy transition. And so I think when you find those win-wins that are both good for customers and good for the world, there's something pretty special in there. And so I actually took a year off back in 2017 and wrote 40 different business plans about how to solve this problem. I sat on lots of beaches in Ecuador and Nicaragua and just sat on the beach thinking all day about how do we enable the business model to enable this future, to accelerate this transition, because this future has to happen. If you believe renewables are going to keep getting built, you believe smart devices are going to keep coming into people's homes, you believe that the cost of solar and batteries is going to keep coming down, surely, and you can believe people are going to buy electric vehicles. Surely the future is one where those devices are automated to use that cheaper renewable power. It would be crazy if we didn't do that. And so I would spend this time thinking about what is the business model to enable that future. And I was actually sitting on the beach in a place called Montanita in Ecuador with my now co-founder Chris, who we'd worked together at BCG. And I was pitching Chris all these 40 different ideas. And Chris, as he usually does, ripped apart all my ideas, pointed out all the reasons they were never going to work, all the reasons that they were too complicated. And then Chris said, why don't we just give customers direct access to the real-time wholesale electricity price as it varies every 30 minutes? Because that will perfectly align customers' incentives with using that cheaper renewable power. So the way normal retailers work is that they buy power in this wholesale market. So in the middle of the day, there's lots of cheap solar flooding into the grid. That wholesale price is really cheap. Then everyone gets home from work. That power is coming from expensive coal and gas. That power is more expensive. So normal retailers buy power in that wholesale market. And then they add on what's called a financial hedge to turn that variable price into a fixed price. They add on their margin, they sell power to you at a fixed price. And there's a couple of problems with that model. The first one is you pay a lot for those financial hedges. You buy them from coal and gas generators, and there's a small number of players that charge a fortune for them. But the bigger problem is that it doesn't align customers' interests with using that renewable power. So in the middle of the day, that wholesale price might actually only be 10 cents a kilowatt hour. There's all this cheap solar flooding to the grid. The actual price of that power is 10 cents a kilowatt hour. But you're still paying 25 cents a kilowatt hour fixed rate from your retailer. And so you have no incentive to use those cheap renewables, which is bad for you as a customer. But it's also really bad for the solar developers because there isn't enough demand for power in the middle of the day when their solar farms are generating, which is making the wholesale price get lower and lower and lower and making it harder and harder to get new solar projects built. And so you see right now in South Australia, large solar farms are getting curtailed, which basically means turned off. There isn't enough demand for the power that they're generating in the middle of the day because no one is using that power. So the actual wholesale price is regularly zero or even negative. So we'll actually pay you to use power in the middle of the day. And Amber customers get pretty excited about this idea that we're paying them to charge their electric vehicle in the middle of the day. But with a normal retailer, you don't see any of that. You just pay a fixed price, and so you have no incentive to use those cheap renewables, which is worse for you and worse for the world. So I have to give Chris the credit for having that idea, which was much simpler than any of my complicated ideas about how to solve this problem. Let's just give people access to the wholesale price. So that's what we did.
But you charge a subscription fee to have access to this, and that's where the margin is for to keep the printers full of toner and keep the
exactly
and keep the lights on and pay for lunch and that sort of thing. So you got to make money at some point.
Yeah, of course. So our model is that we just charge $15 a month subscription fee, and then give people direct access to that real time wholesale price without any margin. And there's a few, I think, we've talked a lot about incentive alignment today. I think we really believe in the power of that. So on the one hand, you've got customers whose interests are aligned with using power at the times of day when there's lots of cheap renewables in the grid in the middle of the day, generally when there's lots of solar, or overnight when there's lots of wind and not much demand. But then as a business, we see ourselves as a purpose-driven business. Our mission is to shift Australia to 100% renewables. And so we don't want to be making money from selling power to you, because if we make money from selling power to you, we've got this conflicting interest. We want to sell you power, but actually we want you to use less power because that's more sustainable. And so because we just charge $15 a month, we have no interest in selling you more power. Like, we want you to use less power, get your power from your solar and your batteries, use power at the cheapest times, get the lowest possible bill. In fact, even better, if you're getting a negative bill and we're paying you for your exported solar and batteries. And so I think there's something powerful there about aligning the customer's interests with the renewable outcome, and aligning our interests with the customers and the environmental outcome as well.
The other day, I'm sitting on my couch on a Saturday morning. We're watching Gardening Australia, as we do on a Saturday morning with Wolfie, and I'm drinking my cup of coffee, and my phone pings and goes, "It's 14 cents a kilowatt hour right now." And this is like at 10 in the morning. It's normally 14 cents a kilowatt hour at 2 in the morning. And I jump up out of the couch and I ran to the driveway in the rain and I plugged in my car. I was so fucking stoked.
Awesome.
And I'm sure that as it goes, I use an app called If This Then That. There's plenty others, Zapier. There's all sorts of other things that knock on to connecting two different systems together. But I'm sure there'll be a point where I'll just leave my car plugged in, and your app tells my charging wall app, my charger is connected to Wi-Fi. Hey, now go, rather than me setting a timer, and that will all come, which is really exciting. The only thing is I've only got one charger and I can't charge the motorcycle at the same time as the...
That's actually coming very soon. So our model is, at the moment we have, as you've mentioned, we have an app which shows people what the wholesale price is right now, percentage of renewables is in the grid right now, what it's going to be for the rest of the day. And so people are trying to, use power, run their washing machine, dishwasher, dryer, charge their electric vehicle at those times of day when there's lots of cheap renewables flooding into the grid, which, saves people money, but then also accelerates that renewable transition, helps us get more renewables built. But where we are going is automating all of that. So automating your household battery, your electric vehicle charger, other smart devices in your home, so you don't need to think about it, and we automatically, shift your load to when there's cheaper renewables in the grid. And so, for example, let's take electric vehicle. Where we're going, we're aiming to have this out in Q2 next year, so only a few months away. That you'll plug in your electric vehicle when you get home from work at 8 p.m. You put into the Amber app, I want my car charged by 8 a.m. Tomorrow morning, and it'll automatically charge at 2 a.m. when the wind is blowing and the wholesale price is half the price. And you'll wake up and your car is charged from renewable sources at half the price. So that is very much the plan. And we're doing that with EVs later next year. We're actually already doing that with household batteries today. So automating your battery to import at the times that there's lots of solar flooding into the grid, and then export at the times that there's lots of coal and gas in the grid to displace those coal and gas generators. And then also it means you can, rather than the coal and gas generators who sometimes charge like $100 more than the normal average price when they're under demand, you can earn 100 times more than like $14 a kilowatt hour for your exports. So it is, and which which and I think is really important because it improves the economics of a battery, because you can use that battery to arbitrage on the wholesale price, which then means that you bring down the payback period on those batteries and drive the uptake of batteries, which then drives the renewable transition. And we want to get to a place where we are automating millions of smart devices, household batteries, electric vehicle chargers, other smart devices around the country, to automatically shift their load to when those renewables are generating, so that we can replace an entire coal-fired power station with renewable assets plus flexible demand.
It seems like many things. It seems like it's a no-brainer. I did want to ask one question, because you're more, obviously more aware of all this than the other. Why is there such a discrepancy between how much I pay for, say, if I'm not using amber? Mm-hmm. Why is there such a discrepancy between the electron that comes this way down the wire into my house at, say, you mentioned earlier, 25 cents a kilowatt hour, but when this, exactly the same quality of atomic particle electron goes the other way down the wire, why is that electron worth sweet fuck all? Like, what's the difference between these electrons, Dan? They're the same thing. It's not like mine are special, like theirs come a special, hey, we're from, Big Energy Corp, we're awesome. Yours, shitty little solar, not as quality as ours. Your oven's not going to go well. Like, why? What's the difference? It's just the same thing. Why is there such a discrepancy between the feed-in tariffs and how much you pay for it?
There's two differences. The first one, which is that when you buy power from the grid, you pay for the energy cost, and then you pay for the network cost as well. So you pay for the actual energy to the whether it's the renewable farm or the coal and gas generator, and then you pay the network company for the poles and wires to get that power to your house. But when you export the power, you just get the value of the energy back, and that value of the network cost is pretty significant. It's like a third or a half of the cost of the power, depending on the time of day. So that's the first reason. The second reason is the point I was making before: is in the middle of the day, we've now have 3 million homes with solar on their roof. There are large-scale generators being built. Australia is installing renewables 5 times faster than the EU, the US, and China. Like, we are the fastest per capita installer of solar in the world, which is incredible considering we have no government policy. It is still happening because it just makes sense. But the problem is that we've got all these renewables flooding into the grid and no demand for power at the times that they're generating, because no one has an incentive to use power at those times. And so that wholesale price is going down and down and down, and it's heading towards zero in the middle of the day. Like, basically, as I said before, we're turning off solar farms in the middle of the day because there isn't enough demand for that power. So the other issue is the time of day that you're producing that solar. There isn't enough demand, which is the problem we're trying to solve. Get people to use power at those times so we can get more solar on your roof and more big solar farms built as well.
It's a very interesting scenario, the transmission thing. It's almost like, food is free. Tomatoes just grow wherever I put the compost soil. Tomatoes show up. Food is free. It's picking it, putting it in a case, putting it in a truck, transporting it to my house, to the refrigerating it, transporting it to the supermarket. Someone picking it out of there, putting it on the thing. Like, that's what costs the money, is the transmission of this thing to me. That's
exactly.
That's what you're paying for. You're paying for the transmission of this electron. Okay, so I get that now. We've mentioned policy a few times, and look, we're talking. I'm an incredibly privileged person to be able to afford an electric. I've been driving electric cars since 2011, 10 years and a bit now.
Awesome.
So I've been able to afford them. But when I bought my first one, it was in California, and I was incentivized up the wazoo. The Californian government even put a free level 2 charger in my house. It was worth $2,500 American. And they went, because they have a vested interest in air quality in California. Like, no, less petrol on the road is better air, less health outcomes, less pressure on the health system. Let's go. So I had a tax incentive. It was under Obama, and I got a free charger for it. Yet I can still afford an electric vehicle. I can afford an electric motorbike, and I can afford an electric cargo bike. I know that I am in this elite group of tiny amount of percent of people that can afford these things. Yet You mentioned earlier that, we talk about the Pacific Island nations, the people who need this the most are the people who can access it the least. When you think about, for example, in Western Sydney, or anywhere you've heard of COVID outbreaks in the last 2 years, that's where it needs to happen. How can we help people who are, I guess it's the confluence of your earlier poverty work, how can we help people who are right on the border of, like, people who say they needed $100 to fix something, couldn't find it? How do we help those people access what could possibly be quite an intense upfront cost to get solar panels, batteries, etc.? How can we help those parts of our community?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of parts to this. The first one is we should be subsidising smart EV chargers, subsidising EVs to accelerate their uptake until the point that they are economic. And they will be. Within 2 or 3 years' time, an EV, over the sort of lifetime of EV will be cheaper than a petrol-powered car. And it is happening all over the world. So, the UK, Germany, Israel, India are phasing out all EVs by 2030. Norway is phasing them out by 2025, but probably the last petrol car is going to be sold in Norway next year. Because
Wow.
why would you buy a petrol car if they're going to be phased out in 4 years' time? No one's going to want to buy it from you. So it is just happening, and so Australia should be doing the same thing. Like, we should be phasing them out. We should be subsidising electric vehicles. We should be subsidising batteries. Probably not solar anymore, because solar is just like wildly economic. Like, putting solar panels on your roof is probably the best economic investment you can possibly make. But subsidising these technologies is still a couple of years away from being really economic to accelerate their uptake. So that's the first thing. And then the second one is, even if it is cheaper over the life of the asset, it might not necessarily, there might still be a large upfront cost that many people can't afford. And so then we need different business models. So, for example, what we were doing with the Tesla virtual power plant is that those people in the social housing weren't paying anything for the solar and battery system upfront. We were installing the solar system, we're installing the battery, we were completely financing it, and then we were just selling them the power. And so they buy the power from they paid discount on their power bill, regardless of whether the power came from the solar panel on the roof, the battery in the garage, or from the grid. And so I think that there are business models like that that actually make this accessible to anyone. So the first thing is we need to get the economics there. Solar, it's already there. For the other technologies, it's close, and we should subsidise them to make them economic. And then once they're economic, then it's just business model innovation to make it cheaper for people from day one, rather than having them to wait 10 years for a payback, which many people can't afford.
The moral argument for climate action is one that is quite divisive sometimes. I understand that, because a lot of people's identities are tied up in how they have felt about this, and changing your mind can be hard. But everyone loves fucking money, and everyone loves to save it, and everyone loves to make it. So as we're moving into this election, economically, what do we stand as a nation? What do we stand as a community to miss out on if the people we're voting for do not have policy around a swift as possible transition to decarbonisation and to renewable investment and subsidies?
There is a huge economic cost to being left behind. There is a huge economic cost of not addressing climate change that dwarfs everything else. There is a huge economic cost to being left behind when the rest of the world is charging forward because they can see the opportunities. And there is a massive opportunity for Australia, bigger than probably any other country, because we have miles and miles and miles of desert that is full of sun, that was actually not very good for anything else in the old industries, but now is a huge asset to Australia. We have incredible wind resources. We should be one of the world's leading generators of renewables. So we should be electrifying our homes, replacing gas with electric appliances. We should be replacing our petrol cars with electric vehicles. We should be running all of that on solar, batteries, and wind. And that will be, within a couple of years, the cheapest way. It's already the cheapest way for many people, and it'll be the cheapest way for everybody within a few years. And so there's a big economic loss there, cost of living cost, higher electricity prices if we don't do that. But then there is this opportunity to build masses of renewables across Australia, use those to then generate produce green steel, green aluminium, produce hydrogen, and export hydrogen to countries around the world that don't have the space for the wind and solar to power their economies themselves. Instead of being one of the world's largest coal exporters, we could be exporting hydrogen to the world, which is entirely generated from solar and wind power, we could be making a huge contribution to the world in terms of accelerating the world's transition away from coal to renewable sources. But also, there's a massive export opportunity for us to replace those industries with a far bigger one that's making the world better.
A far bigger one. I think that's the real key there. We're an energy exporter. We've been an energy export. We were a sheep exporter and a wool exporter for a long time, and then maybe a grain exporter for a long time, and then we became a coal exporter, and a fucking massive one. So we're exporting energy. We can still export energy, and as you were saying, the market and our ability to export it is bigger than the current energy export market. So if you're a party in power and you claim to be an economic rationalist, why wouldn't you? What's the hold-up? What do you think is standing in the way of these policies being put into effect, Dan?
I think what is standing in the way is vested interests that have their short-term economic interests tied up in exporting coal, in fossil fuels in general, that have too much influence over the government. And it's really sad to see that, because the vast majority of Australians are really concerned about climate change. They want to see faster action on climate change from our country and from around the world, and they can see the opportunities, and that's why they're taking into their own hands themselves already. Today, 3 million people have already installed solar panels. There's 40,000 people with electric vehicles. There's 100,000 people that have bought batteries. Like, this is happening, and people are taking it into their own hands. The people are driving this transition. The economics is driving this transition. It is unstoppable. And it will happen, and the politics will have to follow sooner rather than later. I wish our politicians could have led, because we could have been ahead of the game already, but they will eventually follow.
Here in Australia, electric vehicle, we have no auto manufacturing here in the country anymore. So it would be nothing at all for us to go, all right, ICE, internal combustion engines, over. We're not going to harm any single person that's making an internal combustion engine in Australia, because there aren't any. But we don't. And because of where we are and how we are, we get the cars we are able to buy are the kind of offshoots of either Japan or, kind of any other right-hand drive nation that auto manufacturers are making cars for. We don't get to go, this is designed especially for the Australian market. They're not. We just get, things that are pulled together for the UK and Japan. It's in the States, in Asia, there's that many EVs you can buy, like 50, 100, I don't know, there's 750 EV startups in China, for goodness sake. It would literally, not having the incentive for EVs in Australia is like us sitting here on Nokia 3210, seeing everyone else get an iPhone, and our government going, nope, no iPhones in Australia. We can't have iPhones in Australia. You can import one. You go right ahead and import one that's got a Japanese head thing, and you can redo it. But nope, we don't need that shit. It's that. We wouldn't fucking stand for that. It's fucking mind-blowing, man.
It really is. It really is. And I think it is just, it is politics. It is not, it just doesn't make any rational economic sense. EVs are more fun to drive. They're better for the world. And they very, very soon will be cheaper than an ICE car within a few years' time. And even right now, for people that drive them a lot, there are new models coming into the market that are pretty close to the cost of a petrol car.
And when you start thinking about the vehicle to grid option, so your battery, as we mentioned a few times, you said the Tesla battery in the garage. Well, my car, my Nissan Leaf, it can do vehicle to grid. I just don't have the vehicle to grid inverter at this point in my house. But like when you start driving the battery around, and that becomes your ballast of energy, it's this whole completely different system. We are, oh God, by the time this comes out, we're a few short weeks away from an election. I would really hope everyone just take an hour of your life to have a think about where your vote's going and what your vote's going to do. Dan, in your opinion, you've got a vested interest. You own an energy company, right? You own an electric energy company. What would you hope people look for when they're voting around, what would you hope people look for when they're making their vote this year?
I think your vote is really powerful. And we should all be voting with our values in mind and thinking about what do we care about? What is the future that we want to live in? What is the future that we want to create for our children? And that means the world needs to reduce, if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees, the world needs to reduce global emissions by 50% by 2030. Rich countries like Australia should be doing at least that, if not more. That means that we need to have 100% renewables in the grid by 2030. It means that all ICE cars new ICE cars should be phased out by 2030. And so we need leaders, whether they're either of the parties or from the independents that are springing up, that are actually advocating for the policies that are backed by science, that make rational economic sense, that are going to create the future that we want. And we need to be voting for those people, not for people that are just voting along party lines, who are influenced by large vested interests that want to slow this down.
That must be a real challenge as well. When you think about someone who has to vote along a party line, there's an MP I'm bringing to mind. I won't say the person's name, who, I've had conversations with, they are very much into the science and very much into what makes rational economic sense, and yet have voted exactly the same as Barnaby Joyce every time. That must break your heart. I really feel for that person to have that cognitive dissonance when they go to work and hear the bell ring and they go, yay, knowing that it's probably not the right thing to do. It must be so fucking hard to be that person. I kind of get the feeling that this might just be the election of the independent. I get that vibe. I think I might just be hoping.
Yeah, I feel the same way, but we'll see what happens. But I think we should be voting for people that represent our interests, not the interests of fossil fuel companies. And I think the independents are in a much better position to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's cynical of me to say this, but if you look at former party staffers who now sit in high company positions in companies that they may have helped out while they were in office, they're voting for their future. You can vote for yours too. Who's going to look after you for the next 20 years? I'm so cynical about this shit. I'm so sorry. But I'm grateful. I'm really grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and I can't wait to see once the automation part comes into play. I'm sure you're testing it already. I can't wait to connect those APIs to my chargy bits and all this kind of stuff. And I was actually, as you were talking, and I know you've probably already thought about this, but just for everybody in the family, it'd be helpful for us, I guess, in our kitchen, if there was some sort of LED that was connected and it sits on the kitchen wall and it goes green, orange, red, much like the app, so everyone in the house knows, rather than having to pull the app out. You know what I mean? Like a smart device that we stick to the fridge. It goes, you're smiling because you've already planned this, haven't you?
I love that you're asking that, because I've been banging on about this idea of the amber lamp, which is exactly what you've described, like a beautiful lamp that changes color, tells you it's green when there's lots of renewables in the grid. It's a great time to use power, so you don't have to pull out your app. The Amber team have been laughing at me. And if they listen to this, will laugh because I've been banging on about it for a year. So I'm glad I have another endorser that this is a good idea. Osher?
Well, it's also when my in-laws visit. It's when other people come to the house and they want to wait to put the dishwasher on or whatever. I'm like, no, now. Do it now. Put the dishwasher on right now. Because it's 15 cents.
Exactly.
It's going to be 62 cents after dinner. So do it now.
Exactly. And your point before you were making about vehicle to grid and the automation side, there is such an enormous opportunity there. So if you think about electric vehicles, an electric vehicle uses as much power as most people's entire home. So it is a huge user of power. If everybody comes home from work and plugs those electric vehicles in, it's 7 or 8 p.m., we will double demand on the electricity grid at those times. And that's usually the times when the sun's going down and cars coming from coal and gas. It will break the grid. It will slow the renewable transition. But if we can automate those electric vehicles to either charge at the times that the renewables are generating, so charge in the middle of the day or the middle of the night when there's lots of renewables available and less demand, Or even better, use vehicle to grid to actually export the power from your battery in your car to the grid to replace dirty fossil fuels at those peak times. You turn that electric vehicle not only into a better way to a better way to get around. You turn it into a huge asset for the grid that can accelerate the renewable transition. So it is really important. Electric vehicles are great and need to be accelerated, but it's actually how you charge them makes a really big difference to that transition. And so for vehicle to grid, for example, just to paint the sort of pipe dream here, the wholesale price of power varies between sort of 10 cents, or actually goes to negative $1. So sometimes we'll actually pay. So you were saying 14 cents before. I think right now, I was just looking, it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour right now. There's lots of renewables in the grid. And sometimes it actually goes negative and will actually pay you as power. So it varies from sort of negative $1 right up to $14, or even $15 or $16. So exporting your power from your battery at $16 or $15, you could earn $1,000 in a day from exporting power from your battery at those times when typically the coal and gas-fired power stations make, it only happens a few times a year, but they make a very large share of their annual profits by just gouging the market at those times. On a hot day, everyone's using power. There's huge demand on the grid. They charge a fortune for their power. If you can export from your battery right now, you can earn $100 to $200 a day during those periods. And if you've got an electric vehicle, you could literally earn $1,000 by exporting during those periods. So we're pretty excited. That's a little bit further down the line, but we're really excited about that future.
Hang on, so $14 a kilowatt hour terrifies me, I guess, now because I'm exposed to the open market. But where's the transmission cost we spoke about before in that? Where's the feed-in transmission penalty,
so they're
fixed.
I guess? So let's just say they're 10 cents a kilowatt hour all the time. So whereas the wholesale price varies dramatically. So usually the network cost will be, say, 10 cents and the wholesale price will be 10 cents and you'll pay 20 cents, like let's say on average. But there are only a few hours a day when that price can really spike, when those coal and gas generators make a very large share of their annual profits. And there are a few times as well when those prices actually go negative, down to a negative $1. And so there is those variations. We have insurance for our customers. So we guarantee that we buy some sort of lightweight insurance to guarantee that over the course of a year, you'll do better than the government's reference price. But those opportunities really are the biggest opportunities to shift your load away from those times that fossil fuels are generating to the times that renewables are generating, and shift value away from coal-fired power stations. Put it in your own pocket and put it to renewable generators.
Even like if I'm charging my car at 2 in the morning, or the other day 10 in the morning for 14 cents a kilowatt hour, and then using our oven to cook pizza like we did last night at 6 p.m. Instead of paying 62 cents, which it was last night at 6 p.m. when we turned the oven on, I'm now saving 50 cents a kilowatt hour by using the energy that I bought at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but sitting in my driveway. It's just a whole different way of thinking about how you power your life. Exactly. I've got 63 kilowatt hours sitting on 4 wheels out there.
Exactly.
That's a lot. That's a fucking lot.
That would power, it would power your house for probably a week.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of power.
My scooter has 3.3 kilowatt hours in it, and my motorbike has 15 and a half. It's bananas. I ride around on a Tesla Powerwall that's faster than anything on the planet.
Exactly.
It's fucking great. It's unbelievable, man. I'm so grateful that you are who you are, and that it's no surprise to me that you're a surfer. Some of the most groundbreaking, moving, and forward-thinking people in my life are surfers, because they're out there in the ocean and they see it every day, and they're out there with their friends, and a chip packet floats by, and that's fuck, that's hardcore when you think about that stuff, and that you've put it all together to create what you're creating is just super duper cool, man. And I would be more than happy to be your beta tester for your Amber Lamp.
Awesome.
So you can just hack one together, get your people to hack one together and give it to me. Yeah, I'm sure I could. I don't know how to do it. My brother could probably put it together, but get a Raspberry Pi or something and hack it, and then give it to me. I'll put it on my fridge.
We'll get you
and and I'll spend a month with it and let you know how we go over the course of the month versus the month before.
Awesome.
And summertime's good because we have an AC for the baby's room, so that'll work. Could be interesting.
Sounds great. Thank you, Usher. Team will be
I'm so
excited.
grateful to talk to you today, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And I got to say, Dan, like whatever you need, don't hesitate to, action. A big part of me getting better was taking action in accordance with my values. All right. And despite how overwhelmingly, terrifyingly fucked the situation we all face is, taking a small action like this conversation and putting this conversation out there actually makes me sleep at night a little bit better. And so whatever I can do to help you, not only hopefully will help you, but it helps me. So please let me know whatever I can do for you, okay?
Thank you for helping us get the message out there. Really, really appreciate it.